Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode number 134 in the book of Genesis. Today, struggling is normal. So we're going to see in this story, Jacob is going to wrestle with God. And here's the thing about wrestling with God. It is the defining characteristic of the Christian walk. Let me say that again. It's the defining characteristic of the Christian walk. So it's a sweet story in that profoundly God wrestles back in a nice way. He becomes a man, and again God is going to come again as a man to allow wrestling with him. That's going to be in Jesus. But many of the considerations of this interaction are the same kinds that you and I do with Christ. The point here is that God allows wrestling. He encourages it, and he grows us through difficult circumstances, dislocating us by pain. And he does this in a sweet way, not to overpower us, but to allow us to grow through this. So listen to the story. This is from Genesis chapter 32, and I'm going to start in verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and a man, turns out to be God later on, wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel," because it means striving with God. "For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" He doesn't tell him his name, interestingly. And there he blessed them. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for saying, "I have seen the face of God, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose up upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the sinew of his thigh. All right, so here's the big point for today from this passage is struggling with God is normative Christian behavior. It's not a bad thing. It's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, it's kind of an earned thing. And prevailing here means to grow strong, to show oneself strongly, and endure strong. It doesn't mean that Jacob wins, because nobody wins that battle with God in that way, but it means that he's engaged and he's growing and he's putting forth effort. So Jacob, now gets called Israel, demonstrates spiritual growth through the story. And isn't it true that spiritual growth often happens best and most quickly in bad circumstances? And Jacob's in a real pickle, which we'll talk about probably more tomorrow. And with wrestling and with great effort, that's how growth happens. So Jacob focuses his energies in the right direction. So spiritual growth often requires, unfortunately, dislocation by the Lord and wrestling by us. So don't expect to walk away from any real work with God without change. Remember, Jacob's hip was put out of socket. So it's a major event in the life of his hip and a major event in the life of Jacob. So he walks differently from then on. He walks with sort of this visible scar, this limp to remember. And not only that, the limp is others remember. So Jacob gets changed, and in fact, it changes the whole nation of Israel. And apparently, one of my commentaries says that observant Jews still maintain this practice of not eating this part of the thigh 4,000 years later. It's amazing. All right, so the teaching point here is that we are to put ourselves in this struggle with God and listen and engage and be undone, be dislocated. That may mean repentance, changing behavior, being amazed, and put ourselves in the position to be renamed. So situationally, Jacob gets a new name. Jacob means deceiver, and he gets changed to Israel, which is so beautiful. And it's an honor. The name he gets is a great name. It's Israel. What does Israel mean? It means he struggled with God. Jacob gets changed to Israel to be notably and honorably a struggler with God. It's not an insult. Again, it is the defining characteristic of the Christian walk. This struggling with God, wrestling with God, is the defining characteristic of the Christian walk. So he gets this new name, and that demonstrates God's authority over him. It demonstrates change. It demonstrates God's sovereignty, and most beautifully, this intimacy that God sees, and he's with us, and he's in this with him. So he gets this new name. Hopefully we'll get a new name. Revelation 2 says, to the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will give him a white stone with a new name written on it, on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. So if we do this right, ladies and gentlemen, not only Jacob gets a new name, but we'll get a new name when we go to heaven by Jesus. So someday we may get a new name from God, and certainly that is a day to look forward to and anticipate. All right, so let's wrap this up. Spiritual growth is hard. It requires effort. It requires wrestling and is often dislocating. So it is usually or often done in bad circumstances, and Jacob's are terrible here. We didn't talk about that much today. But if that's you, if you're in a bad circumstance, kind of rejoice in a sense. Understand and be steadfast through this time. Why? Because it's worth it. You get the Lord, you get intimacy, you might get a new name someday, and you may get this to name the place that you're at after you leave it, maybe the face of God. I saw the face of God. So seeing the face of God is worth it. It's worth the exertion. It's worth the change. It's worth the dislocation sometimes. It's worth getting a new name. Now, here's the beautiful thing is this affects other people. It's not just Jacob. You're going to see it's going to affect his family, and it's going to affect the Jews throughout history, and can affect us now. So this change that Jacob goes through is observable, it's influential, and in a sense, it's contagious. So again, wrestling is normal. It has great potential. And let's put ourselves in the struggle with God. It's not a bad thing. So let's engage and listen and be undone if that's necessary. Be dislocated. That might be repentant, maybe to be amazed. So likely, nowadays, your wrestling with God will be with the claims of Jesus. So study him, seek him, read about him, ask about him, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, wrestle with him and watch him make you new. So remember, struggling is normal. Thanks for listening.